The shelter was nestled at the edge of town, a modest building with peeling paint and a weathered sign that read Safe Haven Animal Rescue. It wasn't fancy, but it was a refuge for the lost, abandoned, and broken. For Maria, the night caretaker, it was more than just a job. It was her life. Every animal had a story, and she made it her mission to uncover them all, piecing together fragments of their past to give them the futures they deserved. The day had been long, filled with the usual bustle of feeding schedules, cleaning kennels, and soothing anxious newcomers. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the quiet street, Maria was ready to settle into the predictable rhythm of the night shift. The animals were fed, their enclosure secure, and the world outside was slowly retreating into slumber. As she prepared to lock the back door for the night, a sound stopped her in her tracks. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it tugged at her instincts, a weak, plaintive cry. She held her breath, straining to hear over the hum of the old ceiling fan. The cry came again, a fragile thread of sound cutting through the silence. Maria grabbed her flashlight and stepped outside, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The cry grew louder as she approached the source, a small, battered crate left on the shelter's back steps. Her heart sank as she crouched down, aiming the beam of light into the crate's shadowy interior. Inside was a tiny kitten, no more than a few weeks old. Its fur was matted and damp, clinging to its trembling frame like a thin, ragged coat. The kitten's wide, terrified blue eyes locked onto Maria's, and it let out another feeble cry. Maria reached in carefully, her hand steady despite the rush of anger and sadness welling up inside her. Who could abandon such a fragile life on a cold night like this? She cradled the kitten against her chest, feeling the rapid flutter of its heartbeat. "It's okay, little one," she murmured, her voice soft and soothing. "You're safe now." As she carried the kitten inside, the faint scent of rain lingered in the air, a reminder of the approaching storm that made the act of abandonment even more heartless. Maria set the kitten down on a clean towel in the intake room and quickly assessed its condition. It was malnourished and shivering, but there were no visible injuries. She grabbed a warm blanket from a nearby shelf and wrapped the kitten snugly, then prepared a bottle of formula. As she worked, the kitten's cries softened, its tiny body relaxing slightly under the blanket's warmth. She named the kitten Whiskers on a whim, inspired by the long, delicate whiskers that seemed almost too big for its tiny face. Maria stayed with Whiskers until the kitten had finished its bottle and drifted into an exhausted sleep. Only then did she allow herself a moment to breathe. Her reprieve didn't last long. As she walked through the shelter, checking on the other animals, the familiar rumble of a truck engine reached her ears. She stepped outside just in time to see an animal control officer unloading another arrival. The dog was large, a Labrador mix with a thick, weathered coat. His dark eyes were tired but alert, scanning his surroundings as though searching for something or someone. His body bore the signs of hardship, a lean frame that spoke of hunger, and a faint scar running along his flank. "This guy was wandering near the highway," the officer explained as Maria approached. "No ID, no chip. He seemed pretty calm, though." Maria knelt down to meet the dog's gaze. "Hey there, buddy," she said softly, holding out her hand. The dog sniffed her fingers, his tail wagging ever so slightly. Despite his rugged appearance, there was a gentleness in his demeanor that touched Maria's heart. She led the dog inside, setting him up in one of the larger pens with fresh water and a blanket. As she closed the gate, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something unusual about him, something in the way he carried himself, as though he had a purpose beyond simply surviving. The shelter settled into quiet once more, the animals' soft breaths and occasional rustles the only sounds. But Maria's mind was restless. The timing of the two arrivals, Whiskers and the dog, felt like more than coincidence. She couldn't explain it, but something told her their stories might be connected in ways she couldn't yet see. For now, all she could do was care for them as best she could. She whispered a silent promise as she turned off the lights, that both Whiskers and the dog would find the safety and love they deserved, no matter where their paths had begun. In the days following their arrival, the shelter slowly became a second home for Whiskers and Buddy. The tiny kitten, frail and frightened on her first night, began to regain her strength. Under Maria's watchful care, she learned to drink from a bottle with gusto, her once brittle cries turning into more determined meows. Whiskers spent most of her time nestled in a cozy enclosure lined with soft blankets, a far cry from the cold, wet crate she had been abandoned in. Buddy, on the other hand, quickly proved to be a staff favorite. His calm demeanor and soulful eyes won over everyone who met him. He seemed to understand the rhythm of the shelter, walking to the edge of his pen whenever Maria or another caretaker came by, wagging his tail gently as if to say hello. Though his past was a mystery, Buddy exuded an air of quiet resilience. What no one expected, however, was the connection that would form between the two newcomers. It started with small, almost incidental moments. Buddy's pen was located near Whiskers' enclosure, and while the other dogs barked and played or paced their kennels, Buddy was unusually focused. Whenever Whiskers let out a small cry, Buddy would perk up, his ears swiveling in her direction. He would approach the edge of his pen and sit there, his gaze fixed on her as though he were silently willing her to be okay. Maria noticed this behavior during her morning rounds. At first, she thought it was a coincidence. Perhaps Buddy was simply curious about the sounds the kitten was making. But as the days passed, his attentiveness became impossible to ignore. One evening, after the shelter had quieted down, Maria was cleaning Whiskers' enclosure when she heard a low whine from behind her. She turned to see Buddy standing at the edge of his pen, his eyes locked onto Whiskers. His tail wagged slowly, his body language calm but insistent. "Do you want to meet her?" Maria asked, half joking. Buddy tilted his head slightly, as if he understood. Maria chuckled and shook her head, but the idea stuck with her. There was something in the way Buddy acted around Whiskers that felt different, protective almost. The following day, Buddy managed to escape his pen for the first time. It wasn't a dramatic jailbreak, just a clever nudge of his nose against the latch, which hadn't been properly secured. When Maria walked into the intake room, she froze in surprise. There, beside Whiskers' enclosure, was Buddy. He wasn't causing any trouble. Instead, he was lying down next to the kitten's crate, his nose pressed gently against the bars. Whiskers, who usually greeted any disturbance with wide-eyed fear, seemed surprisingly calm. She stretched her tiny paw toward Buddy through the bars, her body language curious rather than defensive. Maria watched in awe as Buddy stayed perfectly still, allowing the kitten to reach out to him. "Well, I'll be," Maria muttered under her breath. She didn't have the heart to scold Buddy, not when it was clear his intentions were pure. Instead, she opened the door to Whiskers' enclosure and allowed Buddy to step inside, carefully monitoring their interaction. What happened next melted her heart. Buddy lay down beside Whiskers, curling his large body around her tiny frame. Whiskers didn't flinch or try to hide. Instead, she climbed onto Buddy's side, kneading his fur with her tiny paws before settling down with a contented sigh. Buddy rested his head on his paws, his eyes half closed in a posture of absolute serenity. Maria grabbed her phone and snapped a quick picture, unable to resist capturing the moment. It was a rare sight, a big, rugged dog cuddling a kitten as though it were the most natural thing in the world. From that point on, the two were inseparable. Whiskers seemed to draw strength from Buddy's presence, her timid nature giving way to playful curiosity whenever he was near. She would climb onto his back, batting at his tail or nuzzling into his fur. Buddy, for his part, was endlessly patient, watching over Whiskers with the quiet devotion of an older sibling. The shelter staff quickly took notice of their bond. Volunteers would often pause in their duties to watch the unlikely pair, their faces lighting up with smiles. One of the younger volunteers even made a short video of Buddy and Whiskers cuddling, which she shared on the shelter's social media page. Within hours, the video had gone viral, drawing hundreds of comments and shares. "This is the purest thing I've ever seen," one commenter wrote. "They must have been together before they came to the shelter. Look at how much they love each other." The idea sparked a flurry of speculation among the staff. Had Buddy and Whiskers known each other before their rescue? It seemed unlikely, given the circumstances of their arrivals. But as Maria watched them together, she couldn't shake the feeling that their connection ran deeper than chance. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Maria sat by their shared pen, watching Buddy and Whiskers sleep. Buddy's large body rose and fell with each breath, and Whiskers was tucked against his side, her tiny frame dwarfed by his bulk. It was a sight that filled Maria with a mixture of awe and wonder. Whatever the truth of their past, one thing was clear. Buddy and Whiskers needed each other, and, in some unspoken way, they had chosen to face the world together. Maria couldn't shake the curiosity swirling in her mind. The bond between Buddy and Whiskers was so strong, so natural, that it begged an explanation. While the idea that they had known each other before coming to the shelter seemed far-fetched, it wasn't impossible. Animals had an incredible capacity for connection, and there was something undeniably special about these two. The first clue came when Maria noticed how Buddy responded to Whiskers' cries. Whenever the kitten meowed, even if it was just a tiny peep for attention, Buddy would immediately turn his head toward her. If he was lying down, he would get up and move closer to her. If Whiskers was out of reach, he would pace back and forth, his concern palpable. It was as if Buddy had taken it upon himself to be her protector, her guardian. Maria decided to do some digging. She contacted the animal control unit that had brought in Buddy to learn more about the circumstances of his rescue. The officer on duty remembered the case well. "We found him wandering near the highway," the officer said over the phone. "He was calm, but he kept sniffing around like he was looking for something. We figured he might have been searching for food, but who knows? Was it near any residential areas?" Maria asked, her curiosity piqued. "Not directly," the officer replied, "but there was a small wooded area nearby. It's the kind of place where people sometimes dump unwanted pets. Sad, but it happens." Maria's heart sank. The description of the location matched the area where Whiskers had been found. Could it be possible that Buddy and Whiskers had come from the same place? That they had been abandoned together? Her mind buzzed with possibilities. She decided to test her theory by observing their interactions more closely. One day, she placed a small plush toy, a stuffed mouse, in Whiskers' pen. It was a simple gesture, meant to encourage the kitten to play, but the reaction it elicited was telling. Whiskers initially sniffed the toy hesitantly, her tiny nose twitching. She pawed at it tentatively before batting it across the pen. But when Buddy saw the toy, his demeanor changed. He stood up, wagging his tail slowly, and watched Whiskers intently. When the toy rolled toward him, he picked it up gently in his mouth and carried it back to the kitten, laying it at her feet. Whiskers purred softly and nuzzled against Buddy's leg, a gesture of gratitude. Maria watched the scene unfold with a lump in her throat. It was more than just playfulness. It was as if Buddy recognized the toy as something familiar, something that belonged to Whiskers. It was a small moment, but it added another piece to the puzzle. The shelter staff began to take an interest in the mystery as well. They combed through records and social media posts, searching for any reports of missing pets that might match Buddy and Whiskers' descriptions. One volunteer found a vague mention of a Labrador and a kitten spotted together in the same area a few weeks prior, but there were no definitive leads. Despite the lack of concrete evidence, Maria couldn't ignore the signs. Buddy's protective nature, his attentiveness to Whiskers, and the way Whiskers seemed to trust him implicitly all pointed to a shared history. Perhaps they had survived together in the wild, leaning on each other for warmth and comfort. Maybe Buddy had shielded Whiskers from the dangers of the world, keeping her safe until they were separated. One evening, as Maria prepared to leave the shelter, she stopped by Buddy and Whiskers' pen for one last check. Whiskers was curled up in the crook of Buddy's body, her tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. Buddy's head rested on his paws, his eyes half closed but still alert. Maria knelt down and placed a hand on the pen's door. "You've been through a lot, haven't you?" she whispered. Buddy's ears twitched, and he opened his eyes, looking at her with an expression so deep and knowing that it took her breath away. "You took care of her, didn't you? You kept her safe." Buddy didn't move, but there was something in his gaze that felt like an affirmation, a silent acknowledgement of what Maria already suspected. The next day, Maria decided to let Buddy and Whiskers explore the outdoor play area together. It was a sunny afternoon, and the fresh air seemed to invigorate both of them. Whiskers bounded across the grass, her playful side emerging as she pounced on leaves and chased after a fluttering butterfly. Buddy followed her closely, his tail wagging as he watched her antics. Whenever Whiskers wandered too far, Buddy would gently herd her back toward the center of the yard, his protective instincts kicking in. At one point, Whiskers tripped over a small twig and let out a startled meow. Before Maria could react, Buddy was at her side, nuzzling her gently until she calmed down. It was a small moment, but it spoke volumes about the depth of their bond. By the end of the day, Maria was more convinced than ever that Buddy and Whiskers had a shared history. She didn't know the full story, and perhaps she never would, but one thing was certain. Their connection was unbreakable. Whatever hardships they had faced them together. And now, in the safety of the shelter, they were helping each other heal. Word of Buddy and Whiskers' extraordinary bond spread quickly after the shelter's social media post went viral. The video of Buddy cradling Whiskers had touched countless hearts, with comments pouring in from people all over the world. Some shared their own stories of unlikely animal friendships, while others simply expressed their amazement and admiration for the pair. "This is the kind of story the world needs right now," one commenter wrote. "Someone please give them a home." Together, as much as the shelter staff loved Buddy and Whiskers, they knew the ultimate goal was to find them a forever home. But the idea of separating them was unthinkable. Maria made it clear from the start, they're a package deal. Wherever they go together. The challenge was finding someone willing to adopt both a large dog and a young kitten. While the video had drawn plenty of attention, serious inquiries were fewer and far between. Some people loved the idea of adopting them, but hesitated when they realized how much work it might involve. Others were simply curious, wanting to meet the internet-famous duo without any real intention of giving them a home. Weeks passed, and although Buddy and Whiskers seemed content at the shelter, Maria couldn't help but worry. Every day they spent in the shelter was a day they weren't in a home, building the life they deserved. She watched as Whiskers grew bolder and more playful under Buddy's watchful eye. And as Buddy became more relaxed, his tail wagging more frequently and his eyes sparkling with happiness. They were thriving, but Maria knew the shelter wasn't a permanent solution. One afternoon, as Maria was preparing to feed the animals, the phone rang. It was a soft, hesitant voice on the other end, an older woman named Emma, who had seen the video and wanted to know more about Buddy and Whiskers. "I've been looking for some companionship," Emma explained. "I live on a little farm just outside of town. It's quiet, lots of space for a dog to roam, and I've always had a soft spot for animals in need." Maria felt a spark of hope. "Are you comfortable adopting both of them? They're inseparable." "Oh, I wouldn't dream of separating them," Emma said firmly. "They belong together. I can tell that much just from watching the video." After a few more questions and a home visit to ensure the environment was suitable, Maria and the staff felt confident that Emma was the perfect match. Arrangements were made for Buddy and Whiskers to meet her the following weekend. On the day of the adoption, the shelter was abuzz with emotion. Staff members who had grown attached to Buddy and Whiskers gathered to say their goodbyes. Maria tried to keep her composure, but it was hard not to tear up as she watched Buddy sit patiently while Whiskers batted at his tail one last time in their pen. "Be good, you two," Maria whispered as she opened the door. Buddy looked up at her, his soulful eyes filled with something that felt like gratitude. Whiskers meowed softly, climbing onto Buddy's back as if to reassure herself that he wasn't going anywhere. Emma arrived in a pickup truck, the bed lined with a soft quilt and a crate for Whiskers. She stepped out, her kind eyes crinkling with a warm smile as she approached. Buddy greeted her with a cautious sniff before wagging his tail, clearly sensing her gentle nature. Whiskers, as always, stayed close to Buddy, peeking out from behind his leg. "They're even sweeter in person," Emma said, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for trusting me with them." Maria helped load Buddy and Whiskers into the truck. Whiskers hesitated for a moment, looking back at the shelter, before Buddy gave her a gentle nudge. She climbed into the crate and settled down, her little body pressed against the side closest to Buddy. As the truck drove away, the staff waved goodbye, their hearts heavy but full of hope. Maria stood in the parking lot long after the truck had disappeared down the road, her thoughts a mix of sadness and joy. She knew she'd miss them, but she also knew they were headed for the life they deserved. At Emma's farm, Buddy and Whiskers adapted quickly. Buddy explored the wide-open fields with enthusiasm, his tail wagging as he sniffed every blade of grass. Whiskers, more cautious by nature, stayed close to the house at first, watching Buddy from a sunny windowsill. But within days, she began venturing out, chasing butterflies and pouncing on fallen leaves. Emma marveled at how seamlessly they fit into her life. Buddy was the perfect companion, following her around the farm and keeping an eye on the other animals. Whiskers, meanwhile, brought a spark of mischief and joy, her tiny frame full of energy as she darted around the barn. But no matter how much they explored or how far they roamed, Buddy and Whiskers always found their way back to each other. Every evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, they would curl up together on the porch, Buddy's large frame shielding Whiskers from the cool night air. Their story became a local legend, spreading beyond the shelter's social media post. Neighbors stopped by to see the famous pair, bringing treats and toys that Buddy and Whiskers accepted graciously. Emma even received letters from people who had been inspired by their bond, thanking her for giving them a home. Years passed, but some things never changed. Buddy and Whiskers remained as close as ever, their bond a testament to the resilience of love and the power of connection. Emma often found herself watching them with a smile, feeling grateful for the day she had made that call. They were more than just pets. They were a reminder that even in the darkest times, the light of friendship could guide the way home.